Hi everybody, Joe the Wigit back again. I am going to be reading chapter 11 today of Emperor of Continia, the book I wrote. Well, the first one. The second one is out as well, The Guardian of Came, and I'm still working on the third one. But I'm going to keep this reading going. I know there's only like 30 or 40 people that actually listen to it, but you know what? I'm doing it for you 30 or 40. So without further ado, chapter 11. The four massive Ranchi were still barking away at each other when a large bang came from the north. They shot up, drawing their swords. 3 ran off towards the sound, while the remaining one stood looking wildly around, a very nervous look in his eyes. An arrow came screaming from the forest and struck his target, sinking deep into the Ranchi's forehead. As he dropped dead to the ground, a small figure came out from the forest, quickly removed the arrow, and ran back into the forest. And then a white-robed man came out and stood on the chest of the dead one, drawing his diamond sword. The 3 remaining Ranchi came back to the camp, only to see their comrade dead at the feet of a white-robed figure, holding the legendary diamond sword.
"It is true. The Prince of the Morganary scum has come back,"
the one on the far right said in the common speech. The other 2 suddenly looked very afraid. As I stood on top of the dead Ranchi, I began to focus all I could on the sword in my hand. Again, the one on the right spoke.
"Look, he is using magic. Kill him before he can, and will be greatly rewarded."
As he said this, I felt a very strange tingle surge through my body, working its way to my arm and then into the blade of the sword. My skin felt like it was on fire. When the power reached the sword, I felt very light and fully focused. With one thought, the diamond sword began to glow deep neon blue as electricity surged around the blade. "Come and get me, you dogs," I said through clenched teeth. The 3 hesitated, fear burning in their eyes. An arrow flew, hissing past my right ear, nailing the one that spoke to the tree behind him. The Ranchi next to him spun around to see what happened, only to find a blade waiting for him. The final Ranchi ran to me with his double sword held high and screaming. He lunged, only to find bolts of electricity shoot from my sword, knocking him back against the tree more than 20 feet behind him. I ran up to the stunned Ranchi and brought my blade down swiftly on his neck, removing his head so cleanly that it did not fall from the body until the body hit the ground. I stood there looking down at what I had just done, in disbelief that the power that killed this creature had come from me. Rogart was wiping his sword on the grass, cleaning the blood from it.
"Well done, John. I had only heard stories of your people's power, and let me tell you, they did no justice to the truth,"
Rogart said, looking at me. "I had no idea," I said, still looking at my sword. Not a drop of blood was on the brilliant blade. Verdaneris and Valaris emerged from the forest behind us.
"Perfectly handled,"
Verdaneris said, grinning from ear to ear. "Nice little blast you did, Verd," I said, reaching down and patting him on the shoulder. "And as always, perfect shooting, my love," I said, smiling at Valaris as she strapped her bow onto her back. She gave me a wide smile in return. "I never imagined you could use such power," she said, still smiling.
"All right, you two, you're starting to get me sick,"
Verdaneris said, dodging Valaris' foot. "Go run along and play, you little rodent," she said, again kicking at him.
"That's enough, you two. Good job, everyone. Let's not get too comfortable. There may yet be more. Let's get moving. We're already losing daylight,"
Rogart said, dragging a body off into the bushes. As we continued through the valley along the creek, I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened to me. How did I do something so cool? Never in my life had I ever been able to do anything right, and now look at me. I was throwing lightning from my sword, then cutting the victim's head off without even a thought. The feeling I had when the power was building up inside me was so incredible. Ever since I came here, a new meaning had come into my life. And in the last day, that meaning became even more than I had ever imagined. I felt like I was floating on a cloud. Then there was Valaris, the most beautiful person I had ever met. On top of that, she had an amazing personality. Then, like a storm, we were joined. If things got any more interesting, I'm not sure how I was going to be able to handle it. "Why the smile, John? What are you thinking about?" Valaris asked, looking up at me and holding my hand as we walked through the valley. "Everything about the last week. It's just been so amazing. Everything. Sometimes I stop myself and wonder if I'm dreaming all of this. Then I pinch myself, and sure enough, it hurts." Valaris began to laugh. "Why would you pinch yourself?" "Back where I came from, if you had a dream that was too good to be true, you would pinch yourself and make sure it was just a dream. If it were, you'd just wake up. And if it were real, then it would just hurt. I often dreamed of meeting my parents, and every time I pinched myself, sure enough, I woke up. It got to the point where I wouldn't pinch myself, so I wouldn't wake up. That's a strange custom." "Yeah, it is, I suppose." The valley grew darker and darker until Rogart stopped us, motioning us to make camp for the night. When we were all sitting down near the fire, that Verdaneris finally got started, he came and sat down next to me.
"Do you feel it, John?"
Verdaneris asked, his eyes lit like fire. "Yes, I do. What is it?" "It kind of felt like when your feet get all tingly after standing up from sitting down too long."
"It's the buildup of my people. We're getting closer to the tower city of the Magistrat, my home."
"Why do I feel all tingly and Rogart and Valaris don't?"
I already told you, Dunderhead. You have the harness. You and I can feel it because we can take in magic. It just passes through them without even the slightest tingle. It will get a little stronger when we get to the city. There we will really see what you're made of.
How?
You'll see, John.
Verneris gave me a big smile, then got up and walked over to where Rogart was teaching him a game a moment before, involving a few sticks and a couple of small rocks with one big rock in the center. It looked like tic-tac-toe with strange lines instead of the regular straight lines crossing. Valaris was next to me, inspecting her bow and cleaning it with an oily rag she kept in her quiver. What is it like living in the plains, Valaris? What are your people like? She stared at me. You will meet my father soon. He will want to meet the one his daughter has split the flower with. My people are made up of 4 different classes. The highest is the chief, and is my family. Then the warriors. Below the warriors are the hunters and farmers. When it comes to the warriors, the archers and trackers are valued above all else. She continued to explain what it was like for her people, and as I listened, all I could think about was how very similar they were to the Native Americans back home. Their livelihood and beliefs all seemed very much alike. The chief had his personal guards, who also acted as his advisors. The only duty in the warrior ranks that they allowed women to perform was archer. They seemed to find that the women made the best archers. Seeing as Valaris was a champion archer of Continia, I saw they had a point, especially after seeing her perform. She was amazing with a bow. We slept through the night without event, waking up when Rogart gave me a swift kick, bellowing how we only had 2 days left to make it to the Tower City. Verneris woke up, kicking Rogart back. Fortunately for Verneris, his kick didn't even seem to sting Rogart. Suddenly, Valaris shot up from where she was sleeping, drawing an arrow on the way up, and by the time she was standing, the arrow was already on its way to its mark. There was a faint grunt, followed by a gurgling sound and a crash as some beast fell to the ground dead. Rogart was nowhere to be seen. Just as I realized this, he came from where Valaris had shot her arrow, dragging the body of yet another Ranchi, an arrow sticking through its neck.
Good shot, Valaris.
She gave him a nod.
It seems that he was alone, probably sent out to check on the scouting party. Well, looks like he won't be returning to report. We are now even more rushed to get through this valley. They will send a much larger party in the next time,
Rogart said, dragging the body off in the bushes, hiding it from view. We packed up camp and headed out through the valley, trying to make better progress. When we were no more than a quarter mile from the camp, a strange howling echoed from the forest canopy. Rogart stopped.
Move faster,
he said, picking up the pace even more. The howling continued, sending a chill through my body. I began to get frightened, and I had no idea why. When I looked back, I saw mist falling to the ground just behind us. Rogart, what exactly is a Nord? I asked, getting more frightened by the mist.
No time to talk. Keep moving,
he said, without even looking back. After an hour or so of nearly running, we slowed down and eventually stopped for mid-meal in a clearing near the stream.
You want to know more about the Nords, huh?
Rogart said, prepping a meal of bread and dried meat. Yes, I would. No one seems to want to talk about them. Why is that? What made me get so frightened by that mist?
One question at a time, John,
Rogart said with a mouthful of bread. Maybe I can help a little, Valaris said, setting down her bow and quiver. They are called Nordrinceras. That means eater of the dead in ancient Plains Elvish. For short, we call them Nords. If they only eat the dead, then why is everyone afraid of them? It is legend that anyone who lays eyes on the beast is destined to die very soon. Of course, the only ones to have seen the beast are already dead. You heard the howls, right? I nodded. That is how they create the mist to hide their gruesome appearance. Because of the legend, no one has dared step foot into the mist when a Nord is feeding. Those who have are never seen again. If that is the case, then why did they attack your brother? We don't know why they attacked a living elf outright. We have heard of a Ranchi who has learned the secret of controlling the beasts. We believe he did this in order to spark the war between our 2 races, Valaris said softly. Rogart cleared his throat.
Time to go. You now know all you need to know about the Nords. You will find out more at a later date, I assure you.
It was just past high noon when we arrived at the edge of the valley. The view before me was breathtaking. I looked over the edge of the steep cliff that plunged down before us. The valley creek tumbled straight down into a pool of water 1,000 feet below. At the base of the falls, the world spread out in a vast and very beautiful forest, made up of the biggest, most awesome trees I had ever seen. The tree canopies came up to where we stood, over 1,000 feet above the forest floor. Far in the distant south, I saw a city with many massive towers reaching as high as the trees themselves. Even though it was noon, the forest looked to be shrouded in late evening. Verneris poked his head out from Rogart's pack and breathed a sigh of longing as he stared at the city in the distance.
My home, Margastrat, the Tower City,
he said, again sighing. It was obvious that the little man missed his home greatly. Rogart looked up into the sky, unable to see the sun due to the large clouds forming from the east.
We will have half a day's walk yet to travel, and it looks like we are in for one of those famous Forest of the Giant storms, Rogart said. Sorry, Verd. It's just that it strikes me as funny that such a small race of people made their city in the middle of the Forest of Giants.
Why do they call it the Forest of the Giants? I asked, scanning the forest below.
Don't worry, John. It is named that because of the trees. The closest thing you'll see that resembles a giant would be the general of the people of Titus. You may never have to encounter the likes of him, and I pray you never do. Well, on second thought, you may, considering he doesn't like you much and would like to see you dead.
Rogar gave a laugh and headed to the west where a tiny trail led down the face of the cliff, barely giving Rogar enough room to put both feet comfortably. The very sight of the trail made my forehead break out in a cold sweat. I was never a fan of heights, and this took the cake. Unfortunately, I doubted there was another way down. It seemed Valaris wasn't very keen on the idea either. She gripped my right hand and squeezed the whole way down. When we finally reached the bottom, I understood why they called it the Forest of the Giants. It was the first time in my life I truly felt like an ant looking up the leg of a human. The tree was so high I had to crane my neck all the way back to see the base of the canopy. Their trunks were so massive. It looked to be as big around as a department store. What made them even odder was the fact that they were not your typical shade of green or brown, or even red for that matter. They were a dark shade of blue. That must have been the reason the forest was so dark, even at mid-afternoon. The pitch black clouds moving in had a part to play in that as well. I had seen the giant sequoias in California, but they looked like mere toothpicks compared to these giant trees. As we continued through the forest, I couldn't help but stare at everything as we passed. A little while before, I had smelled a heavy scent of some kind of fruit, only to see what looked like a berry of some kind, as big as my head, laying in the base of one of the trees. What struck me even harder was watching a squirrel come down the tree's trunk, pick up the piece of fruit, and carry it all the way up. Now, that squirrel wasn't big or anything. It's the same size as any other I had seen. All I could think about was Super Squirrel and how I wouldn't want to tangle with that little bugger. I caught up to Rogard as fast as I could with Valaris laughing at me. By late evening, the sky exploded. At least it sounded like it did. The thunder rumbled through the pitch-black clouds, shaking the ground with every burst. The clouds were not over us just yet, and by the way that Rogart picked up the pace, I assumed we didn't want those clouds to be over us while we traveled with no visible shelter.
If this storm erupts above us, we could be in trouble. The storms here are like nothing you have ever seen or heard before, John.
Rogart yelled over the thunder rumbling through the looming clouds. Lightning began to light up the now blackened sky like a giant camera taking many pictures right in your face. I was beginning to get a little worried at this point. During one of the lightning flashes, I saw the gates of the Tower City not too far off. Before we got any closer to the gates, Rogar pulled us off to the side of the main road, pulled out a thick brown robe, and handed it to me.
Put it on, John. We don't want them to know who you are yet. I'll explain more later. Just do it. Verneris, you will wear one of these robes,
Rogar said, handing him a small brown robe, much like mine. He then put another brown robe on himself to hide his armor.
Let's get going before we lose our chance to even make it to the city,
Rogar said, again yelling above the thunder. We rejoined the main road and headed to the gates as fast as we could. Rogart stopped a good 100 yards from the main gate and reached in his pack, pulling out Verneris, putting him on the ground.
It's time for you to walk, little man.
Verneris just nodded his head and began to run alongside us. I began to feel a very strange tingle as we got closer to the small gate before us. The towers began to grow larger and larger with every step, and when I looked over at Verneris, I almost fell over. He was now half my size. When he saw the look on my face, he began to laugh and then pointed at Rogart and Valaris. Rogart had shrunk to my height, and Valaris had grown to match both of us. I watched, and sure enough, the closer we got to the city, the taller Verneris got. By the time we reached the gate, all four of us were the exact same height. Verneris' nose and mouth seemed to be even bigger than they were already. The gate was an iron mesh, thick and very strong, with a handprint etched into the far right side. There were 2 torches ablaze on either side of the gate, but were just fire and no torch, really. The wall around the city looked to be made of very thick, dark rock.
This is the northern gate. The main gate is just to the east of the city. I think this is the only door that they didn't block my signature from,
Verneris said, stepping up to the gate. Just then a loud whistling started all around us.
Hurry, Verneris, the storm is starting. We don't want to be out here in the next few seconds,
Rogart said, looking up at the sky. That was now pitch black. Verneris put his hand to the symbol. His hand glowed for a second before I heard a click of a lock being released. Something slammed into my right arm and knocked me to the ground. Rogart pulled me up fast as the whistling grew louder and splashes of water were landing all around us. Rogart shoved us all through the door as another splash of water landed right where I had been standing a moment before. I then noticed that my right side was soaking wet. I looked out of the iron gate and saw massive drops of water the size of bowling balls whistling just before they hit the ground in a mighty splash. Those were the biggest raindrops I had ever seen. Each had to be at least a gallon of water. When I turned around, I noticed that we were in a stone hallway with many torchless fires glowing along the walls and 2 men in red robes standing in either side of us, looking a little upset. The man to my right spoke up in a demanding tone of voice.
What is your business here?
Rogart looked at the guard, not the least bit afraid.
I am Rogart, guardian of the Lady Princess of the Plains Elves. These other 2 are her servants. We come here seeking refuge from the storm.
I see that one of the servants is a magistrat. That explains how you got in. How long do you plan to stay? The man said gruffly.
Just long enough for the storm to pass and to stock up on provisions,
Rogart said without missing a beat.
Now, if you don't mind, the lady would like a room and board as soon as possible.
Yes, of course, but why did you not come to the northern gate?
Royalty should not have needed to sneak into our city. The northern gate was closer from where we came from. The storm started to grow violent very fast. We had no time to reach the east gate.
The guard nodded and motioned for us to follow. He led us down the long hall until we came to an archway that opened into the city of towers. There was barely enough room for one man to walk between each tower. I looked up to see just how tall these towers really were, and to my astonishment, they reached into the heavens so far that I would have needed to lay on my back to see the top. The man behind us smacked me on the head.
Don't lag behind your mistress, you piece of dirt.
When he pulled his hand back to hit me again, Rogart grabbed it and looked fiercely into his eyes.
It'd be wise for you to never strike this man again. Do I make myself clear?
Rogart said between clenched teeth. Perfectly? The man said, a little confused. He looked a little sheepish and continued to walk behind us, keeping a close eye on me the rest of the way. When we came to the center of the city, there stood one round building that was no more than a couple stories high. On the center of the roof stood a statue of a man in long flowing robes looking straight ahead with one hand held out. Vernaris leaned over to me and whispered,
This is where I fight tomorrow. The arena of Yimish. The statue on top is the father of the city, Verdanoris. My father named me after him.
We walked past a few more towers when I noticed that none of the towers had any doors visible from the outside, only thousands of windows and a few balconies here and there. All the towers were made from the same stone as the outside gate. All were square and very, very, very tall. All except one round tower that was twice as thick as the rest, and I guess was probably the tallest that stood to the west of Yimish. We were led to the tower south of the round tower and stopped in front of it, staring at a blank wall with nothing more than a handprint in the center. The man in front stepped up to it, applied his hand to the symbol with just as Verner's had done at the gate. After his hand stopped glowing, a section of the wall the size of a door sunk into the tower, then split in the middle from the ground up, revealing a hall behind it. That is the end of chapter 11. Next week, will Verdaneris prove successful in his conquest of his home city? We will see. And if you already read the book, then awesome, you already know. You can find this book on Amazon. You can search Emperor of Continia, Continia. You can search my name, Joe the Wigit, Thewigit, or you can look for Dromon Saga, Dromon. That will show you both books. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And I'm going to keep doing this one chapter, or actually 3 chapters a week, every Saturday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Thanks for listening. That's enough. Okay. And wrong voice again. On top of that, she was the most she gripped my hand. Oh, oops. He led us down the long hall until we came to an archway that opened into the big city. Oh my god, what the They reached into the heavens so far that I would need They reached into the tower. Oh my They reached into the heavens so far that I would have had to need. What the